I want to go to CBS News Radio military analyst Mike Lyons. Mike, thank you so much for sticking with us. We just heard from the Pentagon that this wave of airstrikes is over. Does that mean the mission is over?
I think the president left that door wide open. I think they're going to look at battle damage assessment. They're going to measure what the Assad government does. I mean, I don't believe they'll go ahead and fire a chemical weapon tomorrow. That would just be crazy for them to do that. But it looks like this attack did get more capability. It went after facilities. It went after places where they're actually still manufacturing some of that chlorine gas. And that he's stuck in there about command and control headquarters. I'm seeing that's a Republican Guard, so that's going to take out some of his ground capability. So I think it's more of what happened than last time, and we've added the British and the French to it. There's no question it's been a ratcheted up response.
We heard from General Dunford that there were 3 main targets this time. Can you elaborate on those a little bit?
Yeah, so if you think one of them was an airfield, similar to what we did last time. So we took, kind of one of the military air bases out. The second one was that control facility of where they store chemical weapons and where they're actually still manufacturing them. So it's dangerous to deal with these things, and to get them into helicopters, to handlers, they've got to be careful about them. And then that third facility was that storage facility and command and control, and that's those ground Republican Guard units, which I think is kind of going outside that boundary. Now, the reason why they struck them is because they knew full well that there wouldn't be Russian soldiers there. He said they didn't give a heads up to the Russians.
Right, that was interesting. He said they had been in communication, but there was no advance notification to the Russians.
And that's because that elite unit, for whatever's left of them, of that Syrian military force, wouldn't want Russians around them. That's really how that would work.
Now, they also, the Pentagon officials also went into some detail about the differences between this attack versus the attack a year ago. Can you elaborate on, we understand there were more weapons used this time?
Yeah, they used the manned aircraft, and I'm also seeing reports of, coming from Qatar, if those aircraft flew over Iraqi airspace, for example, that now sends a message from the Iraqi government to the Iranian government on some level as to whose side they're on, because you'd have to get permission to do those kinds of things. But this one came from all different directions. I think the last time the attack coming from the Mediterranean, coming from those naval platforms, pretty much in one direction. This one came from a few different directions, which was more of a test to their system. So we're also trying to see what that air defense platform is like. It was just really installed last November there, coming from Russia. And at one point, the previous administration thought that it was so good that we wouldn't be able to do this. We wouldn't be able to take out these kinds of facilities because it was so good.
We heard the Defense Secretary Mattis say it was clear that the Assad regime did not get the message last year.
Yeah.
Let's hope his regime gets the message this year. Yeah,
we have to see, if you look through their eyes, that they might actually say, wow, they just took all these risks. They didn't really hurt us. We still have that capability. He might still be hanging on. And the bottom line is, as the Russians have come out against the attack.
Right, let's talk about that, because so first of all, we heard that there have been no U.S. losses yet. Of course, we need to make the morning assessment, as General Dunford said. But you did just read a Russian response.
Yeah, from Sputnik. It looks like the Russians consider this an aggressive act. Now, they didn't respond while the attack was going on. They really could have. We'll find out whether or not some of those missiles either knocked some of our cruise missiles out, or it landed someplace, missed something. They could have targeted some Navy ship destroyer out there in the Mediterranean and just missed it.
Right. Now, we're going to go to Ed O'Keefe for a moment to talk about the congressional response. Ed O'Keefe, are you with us?
I am, Tanya.
So, Ed, what are you hearing from Congress? I mean, we've seen a couple of tweets, one from Senator Bob Casey, sort of saying, while Bashar al-Assad must be held accountable for his unlawful use of chemical weapons against civilians, the strikes that are being carried out are being done without a congressional authorization. Are you hearing other lawmakers there complain about this?
We've seen a few Democrats certainly raise those concerns, Tanya. We know that congressional leaders were informed tonight by the vice president formally of the airstrikes. He was calling them from Peru, where he's attending the Summit of the Americas. Of them, only House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi has weighed in so far, calling on Congress to pass a fresh war authorization for the president to use to justify these attacks. In a statement, she said in part, and I quote, "One night of airstrikes is not a substitute for a clear, comprehensive, serious strategy," unquote. You mentioned Bob Casey. Another Democratic Senator, Tim Kaine of Virginia, said in a tweet tonight that the president's decision is, quote, illegal. We need to stop giving presidents a blank check to wage war. Today it's Syria, but what's going to stop him from bombing Iran or North Korea next, unquote. But Kaine is working with the Senate Foreign Relations Committee Chairman Bob Corker of Tennessee on legislation that would enact a new authorization for the use of military force. On Capitol Hill, they call it an AUMF, the initials. Corker and Kane have been working on this. It would enact the first new AUMF since the 9/11 era. Among other things, it would be renewed every 4 years. Congress would have the right to review the addition of any new terrorism groups to a list of targeted organizations, and there's some other changes. Kane's a Face the Nation guest on Sunday and undoubtedly may have a little more detail to share on this if we don't learn it sooner. But this was in the works this week, and then, of course, the attacks came tonight, and Democrats reiterating their opposition. Republicans, however, loyal to the president, still pretty supportive. The House Majority Leader tonight saying, quote, "The barbarism from the Assad regime will not be tolerated. America and its allies are together to deliver the consequences from such heinous action."
All right. Well, Ed, stick with us for a second. I want to ask Mike, because in the absence of an AUMF, what is the legal standing here? Is what the president did tonight legal?
Yeah, there's going to be two sides to that. Some will say not, some will say it is. But the Constitution does give the president authorization to go to war. But the War Powers Act really limits him from staying at war. So with the next 48 hours, he has to notify Congress of this. And then he's got to withdraw those troops within 60 days without that AUMF. And to the point before, we're still working off the same AUMF from what happened back in 9/11 days. I mean, we've got soldiers inside of Syria, for example, which had nothing to do with the 9/11 attacks. So this is where Congress really has not done their job and has not, stepped up and gotten to the president, because they really don't want to go out on a limb. The previous administration, when Obama wanted to strike Syria, Congress didn't want to vote on it. They didn't want to give him that authorization.
Right. So at this point, Ed, do you sense that this is enough of an issue for congressional Democrats that they're going to press this point?
This, in addition to everything else, Tanya, yes. I think, this has been bubbling under the surface really since the Trump administration began. And frankly, it would have been bubbling underneath the surface if somebody else had become president, because there are a number of lawmakers in both parties who have been saying for years that there needs to be a new authorization established, because, Al-Qaeda really doesn't exist the way it did 17 years ago. With ISIS being the focus, that organization has never been codified into one of these types of laws. They say it's time to do this. And Republicans generally, if reluctantly perhaps, agree that that is the case. And that's why you've seen the cooperation, especially on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, to try to get to work on this. And we've anticipated, based on work that was being done this week, that perhaps by next week we'll see language and some plans to actually move on it. It was a topic of conversation at the beginning of the confirmation hearing on Thursday for Mike Pompeo, where members of the committee agreed that they would get back to this next week.
So if that's it, if this military action lasted all of an hour, and we're done, does the president even have to go to Congress at all over this?
Oh, no, he still does, because military forces were used, pilots put in harm's way, and they were deployed. So at the end of the day, we did launch missiles into a sovereign country. So he's got to report military forces were in play.